Welcome, everybody. Let's see, can you hear me? Great. We're in for a lot of interesting learning in just a few minutes. If there's anybody who is doing some of the most interesting work, it's really Sam Roy and his team. So Sam, many of you hopefully have had a chance to say hi to him and get to know him. He's a research assistant professor at the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions. I have the good fortune, I'm Linda Silka, I have an office 2 doors down from his. And so every time I walk by, if he's on the phone, I hear him saying interesting things and I want to sit down and interrupt what he's saying because it all sounds so interesting. And he's going to show us indirectly why it's important for people from different perspectives to come together. As we're thinking about dams and culverts and the art of decision making, you need people with so many different interests and backgrounds to come together and decide, how do we think about this? Do we think about it for a little area, or do we think about it for a big area? Do we think about it in terms of the fish, or do we think about it in terms of the owners that are along the edge? Do we think about what went into creating that dam or that culvert, and how can it be used now? And you can see that there are a lot of us here. We're going to leave time for you to ask questions, so keep writing down your questions. But what you can't see is there are 20-some people who are taking part from a distance, from a lot of different groups, Nature Conservancy, various state and federal organizations, groups like the River Keepers. So there are a lot of people who want to learn today from Sam. So please do first welcome him and then keep writing down your questions, and we'll have time at the end so that we can all learn and think how we could someday become Sam. So let's welcome him.
Thanks, Linda, for that amazing introduction. Not entirely deserved, but it's okay. Okay, so I am by no means an artist when it comes to decision making, but I have a lot of friends to help me out here. I just want to shout out to all my different collaborators that have assisted me with my research, and also many stakeholder partners that have reached out to me, and I've also reached out to sort of compile what is sort of approaching a decision support tool in a way. I may not be an artist when it comes to decision making, but I'm really interested in the process, particularly when it's possible to integrate different types of knowledge, different types of data, and different stakeholder perspectives to make a more informed decision-making process that could lead to desired outcomes. Specifically, what I'm talking about here, what we're deciding on is culverts and dams. I'm going to focus mostly on culverts, and then I'll get to dams near the end of the talk. But I just want to give you a sense of the complexity of these decisions. You probably know that dam decisions they can be extremely contentious. There are many trade-offs associated with dam removal or modification. But there's a pretty broad diversity of the types of dams that we see in New England alone. We have, the quintessential mill dam, which is scattered across the landscape in New England. Some of them are look good like this, but most of them are in pretty ill disrepair. We also have hydropower dams and reservoir dams, which they tend to be located on slightly larger rivers. And they are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so they have more strict guidelines as to how they are managed. And then, of course, we have the underdog, the culvert, which has an absolutely critical role to play in the safety and reliability of our transportation systems. So it's kind of interesting in that the services provided by dams and culverts are very different, but they have one common thing they have one common element in mind, and that is that they are all located in our freshwater ecosystems, and they can potentially have negative impacts on flow connectivity, and that can cascade many negative impacts into our freshwater ecology if they're poorly managed and maintained. So before I get too far into the sort of the trade-offs of decision making around dams and culverts, I want to first go through the outline of this talk. So first I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Future of Dams team. So that all the collaborators that I showed previously, that's a portion of a larger group that I've been involved in with the last 3 years or so. I'll go over the context of dams in New England, and then I'll talk about my own personal project within the Future of Dams project, this trade-offs of coordinated dam decisions. And then I'll go into culverts, which I believe are often overlooked, not by everyone, of course, but I feel like they need more attention paid to them, particularly when we're talking about freshwater ecosystems. So the Future of Dams team, we're a group of 40 plus faculty and just about as many graduate students and probably just about as many undergraduate students who for the last 3 to 4 years have worked together to gain a better sense of the decision-making process behind dams and how we could potentially facilitate better decisions to be made based off of our own scientific knowledge and research interests. And those research interests really span a pretty broad spectrum of academic expertise, from environmental and civil engineering to communication, landscape architecture and design, even anthropology, hydrology, data science and numerical modeling. That's my own special flavor of science that I focus on. But we're not just sort of compiling our expertise into a volume or something like that. We're more focused on figuring out how we could potentially work together to construct new science, new knowledge that might actually be helpful in the decision-making process. And I'm just going to share with you what that kind of looks like. So we have many workshops that we've conducted over the past 4 years or so. This is one example that where we at the Rhode Island School of Design literally drew out in maps our different research expertise and how they actually connect and how they could actually feed into more integrative types of conducting research and potentially assisting with support for decision making around dams. And I especially like this picture because our PIs they're basically just sitting back relaxing while everyone else is doing all the hard work. Unfortunately, Dave is not here to enjoy that picture. But that's not it. So we are also really interested in connecting with stakeholders because that's really how we inform our science. It's really up to how we connect with our stakeholders is how we really understand how we could be helpful, basically, and how we can sort of guide our research to produce something that could be helpful in the decision-making process potentially in the future. So the way that we do that, there's this, for the most part, I've been involved in developing workshops where we invite stakeholders in to kind of test out the different modeling approaches and different methods for data access that might be helpful. But we also conduct surveys and other elements. Basically, any tool that we could use to connect with stakeholders and learn a little bit more about their perspectives on dams. And we sort of synthesize our interdisciplinary research strategy using these pretty generalized diagrams. So this one is just kind of showing off all the various content knowledge involved in the project and how we can sort of integrate those using different approaches and how we can connect that to other folks who are thinking about decision-making context so we can find out which of these approaches might be useful in different circumstances. So that really takes a lot of conversations between researchers. It takes a lot of conversations between researchers and stakeholders. And this project, I think, has been a real success in performing that. So back to dams. Okay, so dams provide services at the cost of others. So for example, this hydropower dam, okay, maybe it's good because it produces a reliable water source for utilities or for drinking water or what have you. Also, if you have turbines in that dam, you can generate electricity. But of course, dams are a barrier in the river, and they undoubtedly have an issue of flow obstruction. So any fish or any species really that's migratory within a freshwater system probably won't the odds are against them in attempting to get beyond this dam, basically, even if there is some sort of fish passage facility. The litmus test for the impact of dams on freshwater ecosystems is migratory fish, particularly sea-run fish. So that's what I'm going to be mostly focusing on in this talk. When I talk about ecosystem health, I'm mostly speaking in terms of those sea-run fish and their ability to reach natal habitat to spawn and rear. And of course, there is some major trade-offs here. So, like, the dams are valuable for these other reasons as well. So it's very difficult. This is a very difficult decision to make, and it may be very different in various locations. What makes it more challenging is that there are over 14,000 known dams in New England. Okay, so that means that this kind of decision could potentially be made in thousands of different places in this part of the country alone. So to kind of give an example of why this type of research is important, I'm going to focus on a case study in Maine. So this is an example where coordinated dam decisions in northern New England actually led to benefits for freshwater habitat connectivity and also for hydropower production. And this happened despite the fact that 5 hydropower dams were decommissioned, and 4 of them were removed within the last 40 years. So this involves the efforts by the Penobscot River Restoration Project to remove the VC Dam and the Great Works Dam, as well as installing a fish bypass at the Howland Dam further upstream on a major tributary. I'm also kind of clustering into this the removal of the Edwards Dam in 1999. That was really a landmark dam removal for ecological purposes. That was followed by the Fort Halifax Dam removal in 2008. But because these dam removals were also supplemented with hydropower turbine improvements in dams that remained within these watersheds, there was actually no net loss in hydropower generation, but there was an increase in sea-run fish population of over 5 million. So that's seen as a significant win-win sort of situation where there was benefits for ecological restoration, and there was basically no loss in hydropower production. I just want to also point out, this is some work, this looks kind of crazy, I know, but this is some work that I've been doing with Bridie McGreevy and Tyler Quiring. I'm not sure if they're actually here right now, but we've actually integrated a media discourse data set, or basically a list of news articles that have been published based off of dams and dam removal, and our own dams data set. And it turns out that Maine is basically a media hub for dam-related news. And all I want to show is the circles represent the amount of media attention that these dams have gained over the past 20 years or so. And the lines are actually connecting. Those are stories that are connecting references to Edwards Dam, for example, to other dams across the state and across the country. So this is actually a really interesting example of how, successful dam decisions can be used to frame that conversation in other places. Okay, so now we'll be getting into my own work that I've done here. I'm really interested in the trade-offs here, basically the trade-offs of ecological restoration versus the services that are provided by dams. And I'm just going to start with a really basic question of how much hydropower do you actually need to give up in order to restore sea-run fish populations? So here I'm going to look at the New England scale again. And here in the map, all these little purple dots represent all the dams that we have in New England. The gray areas represent regions of watershed that are free-flowing to the sea, so they're not obstructed by dams downstream. The white regions are completely obstructed by dams further down. And you'll see there are some spots that are shaded. Those are shaded because there is partial passage thanks to various fish passage facilities, but of course those don't work perfectly. The blue lines represent the historic habitat extent for various sea-run fish species that I'm showing here. Of course, this isn't the whole equation. There's many other fish that could be included in this kind of assessment. But we're comparing the impacts on sea-run fish versus the impacts on hydropower. If we begin to hypothetically think about based on all these dams, what if we begin to start, removing or modifying dams in the landscape? How could we try to get the best benefit of sea-run fish while minimizing our impact on hydropower? So I just want to give a shout out to all of the various data sources that I've used over time to actually compile this assessment. A lot of work has come from the Nature Conservancy, for one. We need to have information on current and historic habitat extents for those 4 different species. We need to know information on the locations of dams and their in-stream order. We need to know about any passage facilities that exist, any FERC licensed hydropower facilities that exist, habitat suitability models to figure out if habitat is actually opened up, is it of value to different species. So this actually takes a significant amount of data to work. And the approach that I use, I'm going to describe it now using a cartoon watershed. So we won't jump into the action too quickly. So let's say we just have this cartoon watershed here, and it has 6 hydropower dams on it. We can plot the amount of hydropower capacity we have in the watershed versus the sea-run fish carrying capacity in the watershed. And because we have a dam that's right near the mouth of this river, we have plenty of hydropower, but we have virtually no sea-run fish carrying capacity. So then we can start hypothetically stepping through this to see, okay, if I remove the first dam, how does that impact our location on this plot? So we could, open up a little bit, improve our sea-run fish carrying capacity, but our hydropower capacity would drop a certain amount. We can do this further and further up the stream, so we start looking at removing those dams further up until we reach the maximum amount of carrying capacity for sea-run fish, and we've hit 0 at hydropower because there are no dams left. Okay, and we can draw a line along these different points. That's known as the production possibility frontier. So that represents all the different scenarios with the maximum combined production for hydropower and sea-run fish carrying capacity. And just to remind you again, these dots actually represent a combination of decisions, not just one dam here, one dam there, but it's actually a combination of decisions within a watershed that can lead to better overall results. In comparison, there are some decisions that we don't want to focus on. For example, if we removed all dams except for that one dam at the outlet, we wouldn't actually open up any sea-run fish carrying capacity because that's still at the outlet, and we lose the majority of our hydropower capacity. So those are the types of decisions we want to avoid. We want to focus on this production possibility frontier. And because New England has so many dams in it, it actually has too many so that we couldn't just go through all the different possible combinations of keeping and removing dams. So I use a shortcut. It's known as a genetic algorithm to help identify this frontier. I don't have enough time to actually go through that process, but I'd love to talk about it afterwards with anyone who's interested in machine learning algorithms. Okay, so let's do that for New England, based on the data that we have, the best available data. So this is our production possibility frontier for New England. You'll see it's very nonlinear. That's actually good news, and I'll get into why that is good news in a minute. Let's focus first on our current scenario. So this is the map. This represents our current scenario. Given our current dam infrastructure, we're generating 100% of possible hydropower, and sea-run fish carrying capacity is actually about 4%. That's pretty low. So let's begin to hypothetically step through this production possibility frontier. Let's look at another scenario further down. You'll note that there's been some substantial opening of freshwater connectivity along the coast of New England. And you'll also see that there's actually no reduction in hydropower in this case. That's because the vast majority of dams in New England don't generate hydropower. They're old mill dams that they've probably outlived their original purpose. They're still extremely expensive to replace, or to remove rather, but they don't actually serve a typical dam-related purpose. Looking at this, if we were to remove all of those non-hydropower dams along the coast, our sea-run fish carrying capacity would increase to 38% of its historic extent. So we could go one step further to this sort of middle-of-the-road scenario where we would restore sea-run fish to 88% of its historic carrying capacity, and hydropower would still be at 87%. So that's the benefit of this nonlinear curve, is that you can go pretty far out in restoring sea-run fish, and you would only have, at this point, a 13% reduction in hydropower production. The reason for that is because a lot of the big power generating dams in New England are located in the headwaters. Okay, so there's actually, at least for the species that we're focusing on for this assessment, there's not so much overlap between where those dams are located and where their habitat is located. So in this particular situation, there's the potential for restoring a significant amount of sea-run fish habitat while trying to minimize the impact on hydropower production. Okay, so but we're still losing hydropower. So there are other decision alternatives that could potentially offset the losses. We haven't even spoken about turbine installations. We haven't spoken about fish passage installations that could potentially lead to keeping a dam, but making it potentially more porous for a sea-run fish to go further upstream. So that's where another production possibility frontier comes in. So this blue line here is very similar to the one that I showed you previously, except I'm including a decision to improve turbines in some of the hydropower dams. So we could potentially, some hydropower dams that were lost further down channel for some of these rivers, we could offset their loss by improving turbine capacity in those dams that remain further upstream, potentially, to the point where we could actually have a net gain in hydropower production, and we'd see the same pretty dramatic improvement in sea-run fish carrying capacity. So combining river restoration and infrastructure improvements could potentially lead to win-win opportunities, at least based off of this modeling exercise. But I want to point out that there's some disparity in these results. Of course, we always want to, when we're talking about efficiency, we always want to look at a larger scale, because that gives us more potential decisions to work with. It gives us more dams that we could sort of think about how they could potentially be used to optimize that trade-off. But unfortunately, in this case, not every watershed is made the same. There's some major differences, for example, between the Penobscot watershed, which it turns out has about 11 times greater environmental restoration potential, versus the Connecticut, which has about 6 times greater hydropower generation capacity currently. So this leads to more restoration efforts in the Penobscot and fewer in the Connecticut. Regionally, it looks pretty good, but locally, if, for example, you're a conservation agency located in the Connecticut River Basin, this may not look good because you're not seeing the same gains as the Penobscot watershed. So there needs to be very careful consideration of what scale you're actually making this decision on. So there are also, of course, other decision criteria. This is not just about hydropower production and sea-run fish carrying capacity. So just kind of a simple example. But to make it a little more complicated, I'm just adding cost as a potential third criteria here. Oftentimes, cost is the criteria in these decision-making practices. So I'm going back to that scenario I showed previously. And if we wanted to reduce the cost of that decision but gain the same potential ecological benefits, we could look at this option where we reduce cost by half, but we would have to lose an additional 12% hydropower generation. Or we could try to maintain the same level of loss in hydropower, and we'd have to decrease the restoration goal by 14%. Okay, so these you'll notice that these points do not actually land on that production possibility frontier. They sit underneath. And this just goes to show that this way of thinking about decision making is very limited based off of whatever criteria you're using to define that frontier. Okay, in this case, if cost is really important, the frontier is actually sort of worthless. You would have to have sort of a three-dimensional surface to think about cost as well. And of course, that's just adding a third one. There are many, many more criteria that are often involved in the decision-making process. So we can sort of split these up into restoration-related services, those that would benefit from dam removal, and dam-related services that would benefit from keeping the dam as it is. And there's a lot of more complicated trade-offs in the center that may benefit from dam removal, or they may benefit from keeping and maintaining a dam, depending on your perspective on them. But really, what I'm trying to say here is these are extremely complicated. This process is extremely complicated, and we are able to capture some of these trade-offs, but some of them are less tangible. For example, the historic value of dams to communities, or the aesthetic value of dams to some communities, can't really be captured in this way, at least not in the way that we have them defined. But we can try. So this plot right here, I don't know if any of you have ever seen a parallel plot before, but it's actually it's one way in which we can show the result of a multi-dimensional analysis, basically. So we have here different criteria that actually aren't that visible, unfortunately. But this one says hydropower. This one is drinking water. This is water storage capacity, nutrient retention, property impacts, decision cost, dam breach safety, sea run fish, and these are river and lake recreation value. Okay, so I've used various models from the literature to try to capture these and to see how removal of one dam or two dams could impact their contribution to the value of recreation or breach safety or things such as that. And each one of these lines represents a different decision scenario. So this is actually showing about 35,000 decision scenarios here. I'm only going to look at 3 of them. All right, so let's look at the first one. This is just if we kept all the dams in the landscape. Okay, this indicates to us that this is the quantity relative to the preferred value. So this is telling us that we're doing a good job with all the dam-related services that we want to preserve, but we're not doing so well in those ecosystem services that would benefit from dam removal. Alternatively, we could remove all the dams, and we would not have the production of hydropower. We would sort of limit our ability to provide drinking water to communities, but we would have a much more resilient freshwater ecosystem. What I'm mostly interested in is finding a middle-of-the-road kind of scenario where maybe it is potentially possible to balance our production of these dam-related services, but also restore our freshwater systems. And this is, again, just looking at keeping or removing dams. This particular analysis is not looking at more complicated decisions that could potentially be used in this situation. So a quick summary of that part of the talk. So the trade-off approach does help clarify outcomes for different dam decisions. And that, of course, is based on the best available data and models that we have at the time. And that's continuously updated, of course. At the New England scale, we see great potential for improving freshwater ecosystem health. But of course, as we look at the more local scale, that's when you start to see inequality in the outcomes for different parts of New England. And of course, there are several options that exist to offset the loss in hydropower capacity. There are, of course, other alternatives that could help buttress other dam-related services, just such as drinking water. You don't necessarily have to abstract drinking water from a dam reservoir, for example. So the costly decisions often involve many criteria and diverse stakeholders. So this is just a sort of a glimpse into the world of complexity that is dam decision making. The multi-objective approach that I showed here, it does have potential to provide feasible decision scenarios that reflect the consensus or compromise of diverse preferences. And this, I think it does actually show promise for potentially streamlining decision-making processes for dams by actually being able to incorporate a vast amount of data and provide and use that to infer the different the quantities attached to those different services, whether they be dam-related services or ecosystem services that could benefit from different dam decisions other than just keeping the dam as it is. So bigger picture, of course, what happens in the freshwater system has benefits in marine ecosystems as well. So that's work that I've started with Joe Zidleski, which shows some promising results. Basically, those sea-run fish are a food source for groundfish in the Gulf of Maine. And also, this project has caught the interest of the U.S. Department of Energy, so we'll be sort of expanding on it over time. And this is a paper that came out now a couple of years ago that sort of summarizes the approach that we're talking about here. If anyone's interested, I can provide a copy to you. I showed those weird parallel plots before. There are other ways of showing sort of the multi-dimensional results of multi-objective analysis. So this is just sort of an interesting rose plot diagram that shows the change in value of different criteria that folks use when deciding about dams. So on to culverts. These culverts are often overlooked, I think, but they serve, of course, they serve a different purpose than dams, but they do potentially have similar ecological impacts, I think. So, for example, just looking at a really simple diagram of just a cartoon watershed, where you have a dam located near the outlet of the stream. You remove that dam. If you're not considering all the culverts further upstream that might be impacting flow, you'd think that you'd be opening all of this up to as new habitat for a species. But if you're actually considering what the dams might be doing to flow further upstream, you're actually going to be dramatically overestimating your return on investment, basically, in removing that dam. So there's abundant culverts that are further upstream, and that really limits the benefits of dam removal. In cases such as this, where you have, for example, a hanging culvert that does not allow for migration further upstream. I just wanted to shout out to the Nature Conservancy, particularly Eric Martin, Ben Matthews, Josh Roy, and their crew on this new tool that they're coming up with. It's the aquatic barrier prioritization tool. I'm part of their working group, and they've been working really hard to construct a massive Maine state database of all the different dams and culverts and their metrics associated with different ecological the potential value, ecological value for working on those culverts and restoring freshwater systems. So they've been a huge help in my own work, and it looks promising that we could potentially construct something together, something helpful in the decision-making process around culverts and dams. The other thing about culverts is that road safety is crucial. So I always put this video in at about this time to wake people up, because there's only so many exciting things you can do when you're talking about culverts and dams. So this is a really extreme case. Not all culverts look like this in a rainstorm, of course, but it does kind of point out the fact that culverts are restored fairly frequently by transportation agencies. So they're on top of this sort of thing. They typically have more funding than conservation agencies to restore or replace culverts. Their priority for replacing culverts leads to basically expanding the size of the culvert. They are interested in providing natural flow through the culvert. So that typically means expanding the culvert. And that can also lead to improvements in ecological or freshwater connectivity as well. So what's good for road safety can also be good for ecological health. So it's possible that we could that river restoration could benefit from frequent road safety projects. The other thing about culverts is that there's way more culverts than there are dams. So just in the state alone, there are about 750 dams. There are over 45,000 culverts. So, like I said before, a lot of these culverts are just hiding just upstream of these dams. So we don't want to be caught off guard when river restoration is happening and we've forgotten about the culverts upstream. So again, to kind of indicate the importance of culverts again, I'll go back to the Penobscot watershed example in Maine. So again, this is the Penobscot River Basin. And here I'm showing the blue represents the different streams and rivers within the Penobscot, but also the lakes in the Penobscot. The green dots represent culverts that have a habitat priority. That means that there's a certain amount of habitat upstream of those culverts that might be of value to various sea-run fish species. The yellow dots represent transportation priority. So those are culverts that would be located on high-use highways or I-95, basically. So they have a very, very high priority for safety and road flooding purposes. The red culverts have a dual priority. So they both have a significant amount of habitat upstream, and they're important for road safety as well. And it turns out there's over 180 culverts with significant overlapping priority just in the Penobscot alone. So those are culverts that might be important for us to focus on, where there could be cases where there's interest both by transportation agencies and conservation groups to work together on culvert replacement. This could lead to some really interesting cost-sharing opportunities where some of these culverts potentially could be replaced by transportation agencies anyway, because perhaps they're unsafe. Conservation agencies could work with transportation agencies to sort of work around those and try to get more bang for their buck, basically. If some of those culverts are going to be replaced, you may as well work on, for example, more culverts downstream to try to open up more habitat. And as I mentioned before, just the same working on those culverts encourages natural flow conditions through the culvert, and that has both freshwater habitat and road safety benefits. So it's really interesting because there's completely different objectives between conservation agencies and transportation agencies, but the project is exactly the same. So I was talking earlier about a production possibility frontier surface, and this is one of those. So I'm not gonna dwell on this for too long because it's a little complicated. But essentially, what I'm looking at is the potential for trade-offs between transportation agencies and conservation agencies. So we want to focus on things that are better for fish, basically. So how can we open up more habitat for sea-run fish? Things that are better for road safety. How do we improve the overall lifespan of culverts? They could be damaged by flooding, or they may have a low structural value because they were built or put in 50 years ago or something like that. So it turns out that there is actually a lot of overlap there. So as I just showed with the Penobscot Basin, those 180 culverts that have ecological and safety value, when we're focusing on culverts like that, there's actually potential for improving both of these criteria. But of course, the cost increases as you kind of go further up in this surface. In this cost-benefit surface. But there's only a few things I want to point out here. Okay, so 3 take-home points. The first one is that dam-only decisions are actually less cost-effective than dam plus culvert decisions, which I thought was very interesting. So on this surface here, this is representing dams only. It's a smaller restoration effort than if you were including both dams and culverts. So the lines on this surface, those are contours for different cost levels. So we can actually follow the contours, and the decision is the same cost, but there's greater overall benefit for both habitat connectivity and safety improvements. So I thought that was rather interesting. And of course, that also means that there are inherent cost-based benefits to collaboration. So the best decision for habitat restoration is also a good decision for improved road safety, which I thought was very interesting. And we can continue to follow that curve. So remember those are decisions that are all the same cost, but there's various trade-offs between the safety value of that decision and the habitat connectivity value of that of those decisions. So you could sort of figure out maybe there's a potential for cost sharing between transportation and conservation agencies, where if there's more invested by transportation agencies, they might want to see a solution that has more road safety value. But if it's primarily funded by conservation agencies, they want to see more habitat restoration value. But this is at least showing that there's sort of a gradient between those two interests. So a summary of the culvert decisions. Culvert improvements can achieve parallel but independent objectives. I thought was quite interesting. Habitat access and road safety both suffer from underperforming culverts. The hypothetical scenarios that I showed here, they reveal significant cost share opportunities, which I think that shows some really good promise in potentially linking stakeholders together on the same projects. And that could lead to cost sharing, which provides dual benefits, saving money for both parties to use towards other improvements. Of course, the cost modeling is a challenge. I was just speaking with Alex from Maine Department of Transportation, and some of the modeling that's been done for estimating costs for culvert replacement is very difficult to pin down an accurate estimate of how much it's going to cost to replace a culvert, for example. And of course, there are future climate stresses. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but I will share this diagram here, which indicates that based off of climate projection models, you could expect the lifespan of a culvert to drop significantly in the future due to increased storm intensity and frequency than the next 50 years or so. This work has really benefited from a lot of different stakeholder partners, primarily Maine Department of Transportation, the Nature Conservancy, Maine Department of Environmental Protection, and the Maine Municipal Association. So this work has really benefited from their input, and I think that we're really working towards sort of a common goal. So I'd like to thank them as well for their contributions here. And with that, that's the talk. So I'll be happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Don't you feel much smarter? And can you just say your name each time you...
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Kathleen. I was interested, you were talking about whether, leaving dams or keeping them in. I was wondering, what's the risks about leaving some of these in when they're so old and they're falling apart?
And can you repeat the questions if possible?
Yeah, so there's interest in if keeping a dam as it is that going to be a safety risk, basically, in the future? And the answer is yes. We have a state dam surveyor who looks at these dams and identifies the hazard level of the dams. They also have information on the condition of the dam, but that information isn't often shared publicly. But it's very true. So, and especially when you're considering that there will be more intense storms in the future, these are already old infrastructure. They're very costly to try to repair. So if you don't have the funds to do it, then you don't do it. And if they do fail, then there will be hazards downstream. So we do at least have information on what those risks would be if the dam were to breach, but we don't have information on the probability that it will breach under like a large storm, for example. But yeah, it's only going to get worse, basically, with dams that aren't continuously repaired.
I was just curious in terms of how that risk perception of whether it would fail or not would then be incorporated into whether people were willing to take the dam out, and if that could increase fundings or something. Yeah,
so we're using the dam hazard or the dam hazard level or score, whatever you want to call it, in that multi-objective approach. So that's something that we can potentially incorporate. But again, it doesn't get at the condition of the dam. It gets at what could potentially happen if it were to fail. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Could you say your name and can you repeat the question?
Sure.
My name is Babak. My question is, so there are areas that the dams are essential for the flood control, and basically removing them might put the whole area in danger. Are those dams out of question for removing, or you still consider them as an option?
Right. So some dams are absolutely critical to flood control or for various other purposes, and what you're asking is, are those off limits, basically? And yeah, for the most part they are. So that's why the work that I show here is more of a sort of a theoretical approach that could show it's a what if scenario, basically, to go in and look at those dams that otherwise would be off limits, and to see how, if you were to remove them, what would you be losing? Flood control, for example. But what would you be gaining? So one thing that I'm really interested in is comparing those efficient scenarios that they're optimized for, fish habitat connectivity, for example, comparing them to feasible scenarios where you do have those limits on decision making. You can't just go in and remove or modify a large main stem dam, like a reservoir dam, for example. And that means that the approach that I'm showing here, it's more of getting at guidelines for making decisions that are more feasible. So it gives you basically the extreme potential for restoring fish habitat while minimizing impacts on those dam services. If there are certain dams within that system that you're studying that can't be removed, you probably won't be able to reach those efficient scenarios, but you can try to get as close as you can. Yes?
Just to follow up on that, do you have a sense of how many of those dams in the state of Maine fall into that category or hands-off?
Yeah, so how many of those dams in the state of Maine are hands-off, basically? We're talking several dozen. Most of them, a lot of basically the reservoir dams, I'd say that those are off limits for various different reasons, but also because hydropower dams are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they have their own schedule for relicensing. It's actually very difficult to actually make any modifications or make any other decisions on those dams. So those require a much more thorough process to make change. So those I would include in the sort of the hands-off side of things. Yes?
Cynthia, I'll try to speak up. You have a lot of data. So I was wondering, are there areas where you wish that you had more data in certain places that would help you analyze and make the decision better, whether a federal agency or a state agency or
I could always use more data, but
Spoken like a
I think-
scientist.
yeah. But I think probably that the biggest gap that we have right now is stakeholder perceptions at like the community level for community dams, for example, or dams that maybe they've been inherited by a community because the landowner just sort of forfeited it to the town, or privately owned dams. I'm interested in gathering more information on the value of those dams by the stakeholders. So what are the aesthetic values of these dams? What's the historic value of them? What role do they play in those communities? And how are they seen as important to community members? Because that's a huge black hole, basically, right now. And the trouble is, the reason why it's a hole in our data set is because you have to go, every town is different, of course, and every dam is different. So you'd have to go to all those towns and gather that sort of information to really get a stronger sense of what those dams mean to those communities. And then there's always other information that would be valuable. So we were just talking about the hazard level of dams too. It'd be interesting to have more information on the age of the dam, the last time they were repaired, the structural integrity of the dam, how big of a risk could it be to downstream communities would be really important as well. Oh, yes,
I
sorry.
have two questions. One is, if you remove the dams, how likely are the fish to come back? You've increased the
Right.
carrying capacity, but do you have any way to measure that?
Yeah, so there's a reason why we use the term.
Can you repeat the
Oh,
question?
sorry. If you remove them, will they come? Basically, if you remove those dams, will the fish actually come back to what we see as their natal or historic habitat, based on whatever data sets we have? So I used carrying capacity for that very reason, because that just gives you a sort of an upper bound on what could be possible if a dam was removed. And of course, different species will respond differently to dam removal. We know that river herring is very responsive. That includes alewives and blueback herring, by the way. So they are very responsive to dam removal. The 5 million increase in sea-run fish population, that was mostly due to river herring that I mentioned before. While others are more sluggish, and there are other impacts on their well-being that really contribute to their decline. For example, Atlantic salmon. There's a lot going on there. And removing dams may not necessarily lead to improvements in Atlantic salmon populations. So this type of modeling might be more relevant for some species than others. Some that already are relatively resilient and able to expand into new territory, for example, if the dams are removed.
So my other question is, I was here last semester and somebody spoke about the rise of micro hydro projects in the Hudson Valley or something like that. Is that an issue in Maine at all yet?
Repeat it.
Yeah, so is micro hydro, is that happening in Maine? So are there micro hydro initiatives occurring in Maine? And to my knowledge, I only know a few examples of that happening, but it's not a huge thing at this time that I know of anyway. Yeah. Yes.
A lot of your analysis seems to be kind of comparative to like hydroelectric power and reintroduction of fish species. Have you analyzed at all any potential like cost benefits for fishing industries if these fish populations were introduced? I know there'd be a loss for hydroelectric power, but could there be any potential increase in local economies?
So the question was, in performing a cost-benefit analysis, would there be some economic benefit for fishing industries by removing dams or replacing culverts? So to the best of my knowledge, most of the analyses have been focused in the Gulf of Maine, and there have been a few different publications recently that have there's been quite a few analyses that have shown the potential benefit for the ground fishing industry by, for example, the removal of dams and replacement of culverts, basically the expansion of freshwater habitat for sea-run fish species. But there hasn't been a really thorough cost-benefit analysis that I know of in trying to match dollar for dollar, basically, like the revenue of hydropower production versus the revenue of the fishing industry. That's not something I've really seen, and I think it's because there's still a lot of uncertainty, and you're compounding the uncertainty by we're modeling sea-run fish populations, and then we're modeling marine fish populations based on the sea-run fish. So it's a sort of compounded error potentially from one ecosystem to the next. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. But I often play around with uncertainty a lot. I like these sort of theoretical models that can at least give you a first glimpse at what that might look like. So that's something of interest to me, but it's not anything that I've really seen expanded on. Sure.
So one last question, I'll ask it. There are a lot of students who have joined us today. If students wanted to be a part of your project, how would they talk to you? What kind of roles do you see for students?
Just come on down to my office and talk to me. So one of my students is actually here right now, Sam Jennings. So he just started, he's been working on the Culvert project, and he's been doing a lot of good help for me. But there's a lot of different ways in which undergrad students or graduate students could contribute to this type of work. I think some of it is just handling the data. Making data organization is very important. You need to make sure that what you're putting into the model passes muster before you're actually coming up with these sort of hypothetical decisions, because if you're not, then you're giving incorrect information basically. The other side of it is connecting with stakeholders too. That's a really critical part of this. So engaging stakeholders. Stakeholders love students. They're always a big help in kind of bridging the gap basically between the academic world and the professional world. So there's a lot of different ways in which students could be really helpful in this realm, I think. That's pretty general, but I could come up with details if you wanted me to.
Let's give him a great hand.